Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren Williams. I'm Adult and Community Services Manager for the Columbia Public Library, part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. This program is co-hosted by the Library and the League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County. And today we'll be hearing an update on Columbia's Police Department from Chief Jeff Jones. And now I'd like to welcome League of Women Voters Board Member, Barbara Hoppy.
Thank you, Lauren. Welcome everyone, and we're so pleased today to have, Police Chief Jeff Jones join us for an update on the police department and focusing on successes, opportunities, challenges, goals. Chief Jones needs no introduction. He's been chief of the police department now for 2 years. 2 years ago, just shortly after taking over, he spoke with the League of Women Voters at our Lunch and Learn in 2019. And that was a very informative program. And so we're looking forward to getting an update and finding out and also asking questions and getting questions answered on anything that isn't covered. So I give you Chief Jones.
Good afternoon. I'll just kind of give you an update where we are, kind of some things that we're going to be working on this year. And I want to keep it pretty informal, so if there's questions, please ask. First, I think everybody has had to use the same excuse or explanation, but COVID has really changed the landscape for all of us, but especially me. When I talked to the league early on in my tenure, it was pretty clear that I like to be face-to-face with people, and that's part of what community policing is. And we really have stalled out in being able to do that when we had to go through Zoom and WebEx and all of those things, kind of like what we're doing now. Because there's no human interaction, there's that connection. It's very difficult to get that connection through Zoom. So my style of policing or community policing, what I think is just good policing, is being face-to-face with people. And doing this over Zoom has really caused us to hit the pause button and has put us behind where I want to be. For those who know me, and there's several in the list that know me, I'm not the most patient person. So this has been very challenging for me professionally, personally, but it has challenged our progress in doing policing the way I want to get policing to progress in Columbia. So we have hired Tony Massena as the communications and outreach supervisor, and I think Tony is on this call, so she could probably answer questions later on too. But the purpose for Tony is really to organize these outreach efforts. My first year, I appeared over 100 times to talk to groups, some small groups, some large groups, but it really fit what I thought was and still think is imperative for community policing. And I very quickly recognized that I couldn't get my other work done if I was making 100 appearances a year. So Tony's job is to coordinate that outreach effort and have our officers in every beat, especially those in our COU officers, reach out to different groups, homeowners associations, different political groups, different businesses, really whoever will have them, so that they can hopefully create that connection. So that's part of Tony's job. The other part of Tony's job is communication, both internal and external. I say a lot of things. I send a lot of emails. I speak a lot publicly. I have a lot of conversations with council, and all of that information needs to be disseminated internally and externally. So Tony's job is to help us with being transparent, being complete in our communications. So Tony's actually has come up with a communications plan that we're in the final edits of. But I'm hoping that will help coordinate some of that and help us be more transparent and just more open. So I know that, like I said, Tony's on here and there'll likely be questions about that communications piece, but Tony can chime in at any point. So I'm really hopeful that this year will open up a little bit and that we're going to get out and be in the community more. In December of 2019, we presented to council a plan for community policing. I smile when I say community policing because community policing is a buzzword that has been used for years and it's meant so many different things. But I want to get back to good policing where we talk to each other left of an incident. And I think we're going to get there with COVID restrictions being lifted, people being vaccinated. I'm really hopeful that this year will be a year that we progress. We have 4 different beats where we've added 2 officers per beat to continue the community outreach unit model. And I'm hoping to add more this year, depending on how many officers I get this year in the budget process. So I think this year is going to be a good year for us. I won't go through and talk about demonstrations and how we handled that unless people ask about that. But I think most importantly, I probably need to field questions and have conversations about the things that the people in this group want. So I'll open that up, Barbara, if you want to help me with that.
Sure. Yeah, we have several questions already. And the first one is, for people new, could you say a little bit about your background in law enforcement?
Sure. So I was a kid that was getting into a lot of trouble in my early teens. I moved in with my grandmother when I was 14. Just before I turned 15, my grandmother was going to send me to either military school or the Colombia Police Cadet Program. We couldn't afford military school, so I went into the police cadets, or the explorers is what we call it now, as a 15-year-old. I didn't like the police. I didn't want to be involved in the police, but when I came here, there were several things that happened while I was here that really caused me to have a lot of respect for the police and have a true appreciation for the relationships I had as a teenager. So I decided that back then, if you were coming into law enforcement, particularly as a white male, you had to have a bachelor's degree. That's what the recruiter told me. And no one in my family had gone through college, so I put myself through school. I'm the only person in my family to this day that has a bachelor's degree. I actually have a master's degree, but I'm the only person in my family that has completed college. I went away to Warrensburg for school for 4 years, did an internship with the Sedalia Police Department, worked there for about 1.5 years, and then got hired back home in Colombia in 1998. 1998 was a great year because I had worked from the time I was 15 through college to be a Colombia police officer. That was my intention in going to college. I worked for several years in the central part of the city. I loved having that beat, had a lot of great relationships that still carry on today. And later went into narcotics, and I worked undercover for 5 years. 2 years of that was spent full-time working with the FBI. And then I got promoted in that unit, and I was the sergeant over street crimes and narcotics, later renamed to be Vice Narcotics and Organized Crime, or VNOC. From there, I got promoted again, and I went to the street as a patrol lieutenant, and then got moved to the training and recruiting unit and was there for 3 years, and then came back to midnights as a patrol lieutenant, and then later on days as a patrol commander, and then got promoted to chief. I was promoted to chief around the same time that I was contemplating retirement. My full intention was to go flip houses. I even bought a pickup truck so that I could haul the materials I needed to go do that work. I enjoy working with my hands, even though I'm a little clumsy. So, you know, as a 15-year-old, in the police department, I said I was going to be the police chief someday. And then you grow up and life teaches you some lessons. And I was pretty far from that realization and actually thought there was no way I would ever be the chief and kind of let that go. So this truly was a dream come true, a childhood dream of mine. I'm glad I'm here. It's the most challenging thing I've ever done, but I enjoy it. And I really, truly think that I can make this place better and leave it better than when I found it. And that's my goal.
Thank you for sharing that in a very personal way. Well, there's several questions. I'll go to the first. I'll try to take them in order. Barbara says, yesterday at Osher, Dr. Lucas Buffalo from MU Health talked about medical marijuana, and a question came up about what challenges the new law has presented for law enforcement. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, and I will tell you that in Colombia, marijuana has been pretty low, a low priority for us for a very long time. So user amounts of marijuana have not really been a focus of the Colombia Police Department in over a decade. Not that we didn't deal with it, but it's just not something that we get too involved with. Probably the most significant issues, and they're still developing because there's no case law, or very little case law, is how it relates to searches on traffic stops. So right now our canines are trained to smell marijuana, and our officers obviously can smell pot, and we'll do searches based on that odor. And someone having the legal authority to possess that changes that dynamic. So we're still trying to muddle through that. But overall, there really hasn't been a whole lot of change for us.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to the next question. Let's see. Someone, Ruth, says, I have a question about policing in general. Many professions have a certification through professional organizations or licenses through state government. What means do police officers have to hold each other to professional standards?
Okay. So we actually have a peace officer license through the state, through the post or peace officer standardized training. So that your certifications and your licensure can be challenged through post with discipline. So we have an internal affairs process, and when people are found to have violated policy, sometimes when we go through a criminal process and find that someone's violated the law, we're required to report that to post, and post will take actions on their license, which could mean terminating their license. It could mean suspending it. There are a whole range of options that they can take against your license, much like a nurse or a doctor, if you go in front of the board. So we do have those controls in place. The goal is always to police ourselves and go through our internal affairs process in a way that is conducive to building trust and making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable. I've been other places. I'm pretty comfortable with our process, and we're looking at improvements so that we have even more accountability and more oversight.
And I have a follow-up question to that. When I was on council, I was involved in getting the Police Review Board established. How is that going? Is that very active?
It's pretty active. I'm a little new to them, and they are new to me. I didn't have any real interaction with that board prior to being the chief. We're still feeling that relationship out. They're advisory in nature, and there are some process improvements that we need to make for us on both sides of this to feel more comfortable in how we operate. So we've been in conversations. But overall, I think it's a good relationship. I think it will just continue to improve.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Another person, Linda, says, as a mother of a child with mental health issues, can you share your feelings, perspectives on appropriate response to situations involving those who are experiencing a mental health break?
Sure. So almost all of the Columbia Police Department is trained in crisis intervention, which helps identify some mental health conditions and when people are in crisis. So we, as a police department, as an agency, we're pretty well equipped to do some initial work. We as a city, and I've been directly involved in this, have looked at either doing a co-responder model with mental health professionals or some hybrid of co-response and case management. We're having some difficulty hiring the right person to help build out that program, but we're continuing to look at that and looking at a consultant. I sit on a council for justice reinvestment for the governor, and no, I abstained from the vote, but I know that we just got a grant in Boone County to help with that process. So that's getting ready to move forward. My personal opinion is that we will never completely get away from responding to people in mental health crisis. And the reason for that is not out of a need or a want as the police to respond to those things, but just for a lack of referable resources. And what I mean by that is we often get put in this predicament that there are no resources at 3 o'clock in the morning. So if something bad happens, regardless of what that something bad is, a medical emergency, God forbid someone wakes up and finds a relative dead in the house from some medical thing or otherwise, someone's in mental health crisis, or someone is arguing with their spouse or even arguing with their child, which isn't a criminal thing, right? If you've been married, you've been in an argument. But if something happens like that at 3 o'clock in the morning, really the only option is to call 911 for a lot of people. So the police show up. And if you call 911, 9 times out of 10, the police are going to show up. And we have to figure out where to go from there. And that is where we have to find improvement, whether that's co-response or some other management model. We have to find a way to get people into services quicker. Columbia police officers, and I've been a part of this too, will stop a car. Someone will be at a low moment and they're addicted to a drug. My last one was a guy who was addicted to methamphetamine, and he said, I don't want to live this way anymore. And as a police, we see that as an opportunity to get someone to treatment. And we drove him over to Phoenix House, begged for someone to talk to him and get him in, and they did. And the police are doing that here every day. You're not going to hear about it, but we are referring people and sometimes doing direct referrals or direct transport to some of these service providers. That can't occur at 3 o'clock in the morning right now. So I think that's where we have to improve, but we're working on that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those stories. Another question, very different, is have all police officers been vaccinated, and regardless of age?
Yeah, so I can't require that they get vaccinated, but about 70-ish% of the police department has been vaccinated.
So all those who want to, it sounds
Correct.
like.
Including me.
Okay, I'll go to the next question. Or close to the next one. I'll go. How is staffing in the department, and Oh, you already had mentioned about COVID impact. So how is staffing and recruitment?
We have about 9 or 10 vacancies right now. That's about where we stand on average. We are understaffed in general and have been for quite some time. And Barbara, you know that it's always been a struggle to fund and staff police officers, but we really fell behind that in the last 15 years or so. I would say that we're probably somewhere around 50 to 70 officers behind where we should be to do the type of policing we want to do. I say that number and people automatically have this vision of 50 or 70 police officers being out on the street and flooding Colombia. And what that really means, it takes about 5.67 people to fill one position for 24 hours a day. So when you look at that, and we're talking about 50 police officers, we're really talking about 10 different positions, police officer positions in the city. So if they were to occupy a space for 24 hours a day, it would take 6 police officers to do that. When I say those numbers, that's really the way that I try to think about it, so that when I'm asking council, and our plan from last December really steps this out, how many officers we would have to add to get to where we want to be. So I would encourage you to go back to that agenda in December. I think it was December 19th. I could be wrong on the date. But you can see that presentation and it will show how we're going to staff Colombia, and we've already started moving in that direction.
Okay, related to that, there's a question, is psychological testing part of the hiring process for police officers?
It is. They actually go see a licensed psychiatrist prior to any final job offer.
And there's been various programs, radio, television, talking about recruitment of police officers and how that the quality of police officers is, and the attitudes is most important during the recruitment process, because it's very hard to change people. So what are you doing in terms of looking for the best police officers for our community?
So that's a really big question. It really starts internally, and we have provided a lot of training for customer service, building inclusive communities, anti-racism training, anti-discrimination training. And we take those topics and we, it may be a training on firearms, but there's going to be some component, whether we explicitly state that it's part of the training or not, there will be some components of all of this in each of those trainings, so that all of those trainings weave together and those messages reinforce each other. But we have to train our police officers first, because that's our best recruitment tool. So it starts with, who are we looking for? And if we're looking for people that are really open-minded, well-educated, caring, kind, service-oriented people, that has to start with training your police officers to be in that mindset at work. And we're doing that. Secondly, we have a pretty intensive background and vetting process. We're going to look at social media accounts. We're going to do a voice stress test, which is the kind of dumbed down version of a polygraph. We send people to see a psychiatrist. We send them to see a medical doctor. We're looking for things that would cause us concerns with their ability to empathize with people and be unbiased in their decision making. So we do that on the front end. There is a part of this that we're trying to build that I think will even help more, and that is we're trying to involve people from the community, not only in attending our training sessions, but helping to provide that training. So I think that will help us as we move forward with our recruiting and having our officers and our other employees be those recruiters. It will help us improve our ability to spot those people that we think would be good at this for the right reasons.
Thank you. Here's another question. We're having quite a few questions. What are some trends in crime in Colombia that concern you, and maybe some that are positive and that are improving?
Okay, so I'm going to start with the negative. With COVID and kids being out of school, our vehicle break-ins and vehicle thefts are through the roof. So we have kids that'll roam your neighborhood and they'll look to see if you left your car unlocked, and they're going to steal all of your change out of your car. And we have that happen night after night, day after day. Not a high priority, but it violates someone's space. And we still take that seriously. It's just a lower priority because it's just property. But we see that trend, and that's continued over the last year. Same with cars running. In the winter months, that always goes up because people leave their cars running. And in the really hot months, it'll go up because people leave their cars running. So for the people in this car, please don't leave your car running unless you have remote start. It's actually against city ordinance to leave your car unoccupied and running. That does not apply to remote start. The ordinance was written before remote start was a thing, but just we see those trends. And then obviously over the last couple of years, we've had a couple different groups of gang members who have been shooting at each other. And we have worked with state and federal government officials to come up with a task force to try to tamp some of that down. We've had a lot of successes in addressing some of that. I think the numbers would be much, much higher had we not done that. And we're looking at other outreach efforts to deal with shootings. They're not stranger on stranger crimes, which is a positive. But it is still young people shooting at each other. And no matter how important they think it is to have that status in the community now, when they kill somebody, it really robs us of a lot of potential when we have young people killed. As a young person who was involved in a lot of crazy stuff, I will tell you that I didn't think that way. And I didn't see myself as having value. And I think we have a potential to do some outreach and maybe improve that for some people. But our most, as law enforcement, our most positive gains have been in clearing cases. And in some areas, our clearance rates are 20 or 30% higher than they were 2 years ago on average. So our clearance rates are much, much higher than they used to be for shootings, for homicides, for burglaries, for serious offenses. If you commit them in Colombia, you are far more likely now to be caught and prosecuted than you were 2 years ago.
Thank you. We'll go to the next question. Is I just want to mention there's a lot of thank yous in the chat just for your work and for being here. There is a question that asks about the leadership of the Colombia Police Officers Association. Given that Dale Roberts is no longer its leader, what would you like to see in a new CPOA leader?
So actually, Dale Roberts still does work for CPOA. They have made some changes in their board. So the way that structure is set up is there is a board of directors, which includes the president. The president recently changed in recent months. It's now Matt Nichols. Matt Nichols is very focused on community policing and has been. He also sits on the Vehicle Stops Committee to address disparities. Just really seems to be an involved guy, I think. And he is the one, that position is the one that maintains and evaluates Dale Roberts' performance. So that's why you've seen that dynamic change, is because the president has changed in how he manages Dale's position and others. I think that perspective has changed considerably. I think you're going to see a lot of positive change in CPOA over the next year. I don't want to steal their thunder and talk about some of the plans that they have, but I think that they will be very community focused, much more than they have been in the past.
Thank you. Let's see. Steve says, thank you for being here today. You mentioned wanting your recruits to be well educated among other attributes. Requirements were changed several years ago to allow persons without college credits to join as part of an effort to provide access to minority applicants. What has been the result of that policy in light of your comment about well-educated applicants? What do you mean by well-educated? So going back to that previous topic.
Right. So I have to take a professional and a personal stance on this, and they do blend a little bit. So as someone who could not get hired here without a college degree and spent decades paying off student loans so that I could be a police officer making not very much money. I see some value in working through college, the discipline that it takes to get good grades and graduate from college. I think that prepares people for professional jobs in general. And I have a true appreciation personally for that work. I also recognize professionally that not everyone needs to go to college to be smarter than me. And I have a lot of young people that have some college, some with very little, that will run this place someday because they're smart. But their education comes in seeking out police-related or professional-related training that we supply them either through internal processes or external processes. So that education comes and we get to focus what that education is. And I really have a true appreciation for what that can mean for us in a positive way. But it's also a huge responsibility when you lower a college requirement and you have to supplement it with your own training. We have our own training and recruiting unit. And I don't know if it's one of your questions, but it might be. There's currently a bill in the legislature that looks at having all training being vetted through Missouri Post. And I had a conversation about that yesterday. I have some serious concerns because, you know, if you're Ferguson or Boonville or some other small municipality with limited intellectual assets, you might benefit from having training that is all vetted through Post. But for us, what that would mean, since we do have just an impressive cadre of people who can teach and instruct on all different topics: firearms, domestic violence, search and seizure, customer service, race relations, whether that's anti-biased or anti-racist or inclusive communities. We have people who are instructors in that, and other places, other people from different states, especially people in other regions of the state, come here for training. And if we are mandated to have our training be approved by Post, then we will be teaching to the lowest common denominator or the middle, similar to a public school. And that lowers the bar for us. We have a pretty high bar for our training, and I don't want to be mandated to lower the bar. So I have some concerns there. But overall, we train our people. I think it's important to train our people to have good quality training that fits our community. And sometimes we have to work really hard to supplement not having a college education, to get back, I think it's Steve's question. But I personally would like to and have considered upping those requirements back to have more college credit hours. But there's a balance there, and I'm still not sure where that balance is.
Thank you. There's another question regarding an earlier comment about referring to social services. And that person asked if you are keeping statistics on how often the police refer to social services, and whether that might be a good PR thing for the community to know.
I think it would be, and Tony's on here. We've actually had this conversation. Actually, we had it last Wednesday when I met with Tony. So Tony, you can chime in if you, actually, I don't know if Tony can chime in, but she might be able to do it through chat. When we had the community outreach unit in the first iteration of the community outreach unit, we had an app that was on their phone or an iPad, and they could document through that app what resources they were referring people to. And we've talked about that app is outdated and we'd have to update it again. But we have talked about doing that again. We currently are not set up to report those, but I think Tony and I both see the value in that. We just have to figure out how to make that happen, and how we could afford it and implement it. Tony, do you have anything to add?
Well, I just want to say anecdotally, there are lots of instances where officers are referring individuals to organizations, to agencies, to other government-related programs. And in fact, several officers and command staff members sit on boards of organizations. I will call out FACE because they have been very willing to accept referrals from the field, and they deal so closely with children and families that it's a really good alliance to have.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
Thank you, both of you. Going on to another question. What is it, training related again? What training do police officers have to help them handle juvenile problems?
Well, we do train with the juvenile office periodically. It's also training that they have in the academy. Juvenile problems are usually family problems, and dealing with CIT in particular, that training that we get helps to mitigate some of those issues. And some of the stuff that we do, we train, so that's the short answer, but we also try to do some things through policy to address dealing with juveniles. When we had school resource officers in the school, we had to have a memorandum of understanding or an MOU with CPS on how we deal with children. And we had to alter that agreement because when I first came as chief, what I saw is that the schools where we had SROs were getting more referrals to the juvenile office through our SROs. And I had a personal opinion that we were being used as a crutch when other tools were not being used or attempted. So we changed our MOU with the schools so that they had to go through a process and try some other things before having us do a referral to the juvenile office. And we've also worked with the juvenile office to where there's different types of referrals, really. Some are service and some of them are justice involved. And we really try to steer away from being justice involved wherever we can with kids. And again, part of that comes from my personal experience as a kid who was in trouble, and I had a lot of opportunities to not be justice involved. And the more of that we can do and try to address the behavior, I think we should. Not that we don't hold kids accountable. I believe that we have to hold kids accountable, but I think we can do it in different ways than putting them into a criminal justice system. So policy is a big part of that. We do training, and officers are pretty well equipped to deal with kids and kid issues, but a lot of that is policy driven.
Thank you. And I wanted to follow up on another sort of youth related question, which, oh, here it is. Would it be a good idea to have a cadet pre-police officer training program starting as young as high school students?
We have that. We have police explorers. COVID has limited our meetings, but that is how I started. And we restarted the police cadet program probably about 18 months ago.
And so is that with all the high schools, or?
Yeah, it actually can start as young as middle school, but it goes through high school.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We'll go to another question. Cash bail often results in who is incarcerated in jail. Please talk about the cash bail situation in Colombia.
So there are different types of bail, and just so everybody knows, I don't control bail, but probably not the most popular opinion, but it is my opinion that there are some people that have to be compartmentalized from the rest of society until behavior can be changed and things can be mitigated. So I'm not completely opposed to people being incarcerated on cash bail, especially if they're dangerous to the community. I will tell you, I think that's a very small percentage of people. Sometimes cash bail is used to get people to pay a fine or a sum of money to the court. I have my personal opinions about that, but I'm not going to share them here. But those are not really the cash bails that I think are important to keep. I think cash bails for people who are stalking their spouses or shooting people or doing things to harm other people are an important tool. They are used sparingly, but they are used, and I think they're an important tool.
Thank you. Another question. What is FACE? F-A-C-E.
Hang on just a second. I keep this on my desk. So it is the Family Access Center for Excellence. They deal with youth and families, I think up to 19, but they do all kinds of services for families. I don't know, is that backward on your screen?
No, it's coming out. No, it's good.
Okay. Really good resource, and it's a good referral resource. So if we have a kiddo that's having issues, middle school, high school, we can take them to FACE and get referrals to different services. Very helpful people, and helpful enough to where I keep a stack of their pamphlets on my desk in my office, and I refer people from the chief's office. So I make sure that I keep them here.
And who runs FACE, or is that public? Is it private? Is it nonprofit?
I don't know everybody. It's in the space with United Way, so I know that there's some funding there, but I don't know who all funds FACE. Tony might. We have someone who sits on the board, but I don't know where all their funding comes from.
Thank you. Tony says MU is sponsoring or behind that. Okay, let's see. Another person says, going back to your own personal experience, have you found a way to share your own story with youth who are becoming involved in crime?
Yeah, so I get to talk in front of groups. We have Job Point. I talk in front of them at their graduation. I talk in front of high school groups. And one of the things that I haven't done it since COVID, but one of the things that I thought was really valuable is there was a kind of a reentry program for kids who had been in trouble at school, especially high school students. So if they're in fights or some other having other issues at school, they have to all come together at the school board office, and they have someone who moderates, and they go through and they talk about what outcomes are going to be if the behavior continues. And I've gotten to go participate in those, but I come not as much with the perspective of the police chief, but as a perspective of a kid who was getting into a lot of trouble and where that was headed for me, and really trying to give kids a positive message as to where things can go. And, I went from one extreme to the other. And that was a personal choice. And we talk about personal choices. And at some point in your life, especially as a young man, for me, there was a tipping point for me, and I had a choice to make. And my grandmother helped put me in a position to make that choice, but we get to talk about that. And that's an opportunity that I get to take, or at least did pre-COVID. I hope that it continues. But that turns into an emotional thing for me. I have to choke back tears when I'm telling these kids this stuff, because, there are points in your life that are pivotal. And I encourage them to take the opportunity to sit in the school board office and have one of those pivotal moments. But I'm always looking for more opportunities. So if there's people on this call that think I need to be in front of some group or take some opportunity, let me know. That's what Tony's here for too, to help me navigate that. So
thank you for sharing that. There's another question related to the state legislature. Our state legislature is fast tracking a nullification bill that would punish police for helping to enforce federal gun laws. Do you or the department take a position on this legislation that seems to be eliminating federal local partnerships like joint violent crime task force work, like we've had in Colombia?
Yeah, I have serious concerns about losing that partnership. Partnerships with other government entities have to be managed. I think that we manage ours. I don't know that it's the same in every jurisdiction in Missouri, but we're not running out trying to do the federal government's bidding. Instead, we try to use federal government resources to address our violent crime. And I think taking that approach has been healthy for us as a community. I have a lot of concerns with how that bill is written and how it will impact us and local resources that help us focus on dealing with very violent people doing very violent things.
Thank you. Another question that I had, I'll throw this in, is can you give us an update on traffic stops and the equity issue in that?
Sure. So we have, like most jurisdictions in Missouri, we have a higher disparity or a high disparity between white motorists and black motorists being stopped. So you're about 4 times, and it's a generalization and it changes month to month, but about 4 times more likely to be stopped in representation to your representation in the community of for black folks as it is to white folks. And that doesn't necessarily mean that people are being discriminated against, but it does cause it causes me concern, in that I want to make sure that we're policing fairly. I can't say that I really cater to a number, because I don't. I think there are a lot of things that play to the number, but I do want to make sure that we're policing fairly. So we've done a few things to try to address that. One is, if officers have a really high disparity, we have started over the last few months addressing that with a supervisor and letting them know that they have an officer with a high disparity, so that they can have the conversation and see if there's some kind of training issue, if it's related to an assignment or where they're at. They may be in a part of the community where, even though our population's only around 10% African American, they may be working in a part of town where it's 80%. So we have to be mindful of those types of things. But I also want it to be on the mind of a police officer when they're making a choice whether to stop a car or not. Are they stopping the car for the violation? Are they stopping the car for a valid investigative reason? Or are they stopping that car over another car based on some bias that they don't even recognize? And I think the more that we have those conversations, the better off we'll be. But that's one of the things that we're doing. The others, I have a vehicle stops committee that is looking at the different things that officers consider when stopping cars. I'll give you an example of that in just a second, a personal example. And then the third is we have an MU research team that Moon Choi agreed. Tony and I thought we'd have about a 30-minute sales job with the president of the university, but it took us, and Tony, you can correct me if I'm wrong, about 30 seconds for him to tell us he would devote resources to this research. But we have a research team from MU that is looking at traffic stop disparities, and the variables that officers consider when stopping cars so that we can take action on those things that are actionable. So if there's a training opportunity or a policy opportunity that we can learn from that research, then we'll take it. So there's a few things there. When I talk about variables, I'm going to tell you a quick story. I don't know how much time we have, and I don't want to run us out.
I have about
7
8
minutes.
to 10 minutes.
Yeah. So when I was a new police officer in field training in Sedalia, Missouri, I was sitting in an intersection. There used to be a Sony or a Shoney's at this intersection, and there were two cars at the stoplight to my left. I was at the stoplight to my left. There were two cars. Both of them had the left front headlight out. One of the cars was newer. One of the cars was older and beat up. And my field training officer told me there were two different messages that they gave me. And this was 23 years ago. He said, "Which one of those cars are you going to stop?" And I said, "I don't know," because I had to make a decision between the two cars. He was going to make me stop one of those cars. "Which one are you going to stop?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Always stop the car that is in the most disrepair." And I asked why, and he said, because people who don't take care of their property usually don't take care of warrants, and you'll likely have an arrest warrant if you stop people who have cars in disrepair. So earlier he had told me to look for equipment violations because people who didn't care for their vehicles would oftentimes have warrants. Now, as a 21-year-old kid coming into law enforcement, that all sounded really logical to me. But knowing that that is something that was in the back of my mind, and it was a practice of mine because I really never challenged it for years. I stopped cars that were in disrepair. And now, as not necessarily the chief of police, but an older guy who's been doing this a long time through my relationships, I know that what I did was I disproportionately affected people who didn't have a lot of money. And by doing that, I disproportionately affected people that were minorities. I know that to be fact just from research. My intent was never to target an individual group. I was really targeting people who I thought would be wanted. But through that practice alone, that was one police officer following the advice of one field training officer 23 years ago, I've probably stopped thousands of cars. So what does that do for disproportionate stops? Those are the types of things that I think that I can address through research. I think I can address those through the Vehicle Stops Committee, and I think I can deal with those things through supervisors and having those conversations. That's my hope.
Thank you very much for sharing that personal story and your insights on that. We have a couple more questions. One I really want to get to, several people have asked. And that is, how many Black or brown officers do we have in the CPD? And is there affirmative action to increase those numbers to reflect the population of the area? And what advice would you give to someone that doesn't feel qualified but has a desire to work in the field?
Okay, so I don't know the exact number. I know that we don't have enough minorities in the police department to match the demographics of the city. I know that to be true. I don't have any hard numbers, and that would just, and I don't get to track those numbers. It would be against the city's rules for me to track those. Human resources can track them if people volunteer the information, but I don't. It would just be anecdotally by looking at people and seeing, what they claim as being their race. As far as recruitment, I think that the supervisory and command structure of the police department has to look like the community for us to recruit qualified police officers. And that's a catch-22 because we are a paramilitary organization, and to get promoted, generally you have to have come up through the ranks. So that causes us issues in getting people into supervisory positions. I'll share it here for the first time. We haven't announced anything, but we just promoted, and it's effective, is it next week, Tony? The promotion of our second Black female sergeant in the history of the Columbia Police Department. I've worked with Keisha for almost 20 years. She's worked in the schools. She's worked in the central part of the city. She has a very similar personal story to my own. I think she is going to be a great supervisor. I did not promote Keisha because she was Black. I promoted Keisha because she's the best. But what that does for us from a recruiting standpoint is people of color will see that we have leaders in positions who look like them. And I think that that helps for recruiting. Anybody who doesn't feel qualified but has a passion for this is probably more qualified than they know. So I would always encourage them to call me or come talk to me. I'm happy to have that conversation. I know the mayor jokes in open council meetings about me recruiting, but if I go to Applebee's and the server is somebody who really gives good customer service, I'm going to try to recruit them. So really, truly, if there's someone who you think would be a good police officer and they're interested in that and they just don't know, have them come talk to me.
Thank you. I'll do one more question because we're almost running out of time. And that one is, the Missouri legislature is moving through a bill that criminalizes blocking traffic as response to the BLM protests. We know about prosecutorial discretion, but charging begins with the arresting officer. What is your understanding of the proposed legislation, and how do you envision CPD approaching local protests if this bill becomes law?
So it's already illegal in Colombia to block the streets without a permit. We went through almost a month of demonstrations where we allowed people to block the street. As a matter of fact, we used police resources to do it. It really comes down to discretion. Before you ever get to prosecutorial discretion, you get to police officer discretion. And there's been a lot of conversation about police discretion. And I will tell you that police discretion almost always benefits the offender. So I don't know that that would be an issue here. We're going to handle protests as we did this summer. And I'll tell you how we did that this summer. People get really frustrated if they have to sit in traffic. I'm like the most road ragey person. I'm a closeted road rager. But people who have to sit in traffic, even for protests, get really frustrated, and that becomes an issue. So what we did is we used drones, and we put drones up in the sky, and we managed that. The purpose of those drones were to manage traffic. We put a bubble around the protests with police cars, and we rerouted traffic so people didn't have to stop. So traffic continued to flow. That worked very well for us. There's a few main arteries that we worked out prior to any protests. We worked out those logistics with the organizers so they knew the ground rules. The only tickets we issued were when some demonstrators went to the business loop, and we had pre-assigned some streets that, for emergency purposes, we have to be able to get to emergencies with fire trucks and ambulances, that they were not allowed to block. And as long as we worked it out, it wasn't an issue. So when they blocked the business loop, they were actually going to block I-70. That was not to happen. And we issued some tickets, and it never happened again. So I don't see that becoming an issue for us. We would still police our protests and make sure that people are protected and even if it violates a city ordinance, protected and demonstrating peacefully. As long as there's no property damage or people not getting hurt, we're going to try to support that the best we can.
Oh, thank you so much. And with that, I want to thank you for being so forthright in answering the questions. And I think we got to all of them. We look forward to inviting you back in another 2 years and hopefully in person, not on Zoom. And I just wanted to mention the next Lunch and Learn is April 13th about climate crisis and renewable energy. And we also have 2 candidate forums coming up, March 16th at 7 p.m., the city council races in wards 2 and 6. And on March 23rd, the Columbia Public School candidate forum and also the state rep for the 45th district. And that's 7 p.m. also. So I hope the viewers will join us. Again, thank you for taking time out of your day to communicate with the public. And this will be accessible for people on Zoom. So there'll be even more participants watching. And there were just loads of thank yous in the chat if you didn't see that. So
well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.